Hey there, I'm Joshua Johnson. It's good to be with you on this Tuesday, July 26th. And tonight we're talking about extreme weather, but not just heat. Flooding is the issue in St. Louis. In just a few hours, it got more rainfall than any time in the last 100 years. We're live with the latest. Heat, of course, remains a huge threat. After a few scorching days in the Northeast, now the Pacific Northwest is bracing for a heat wave. We'll have your national forecast. Also tonight, WNBA star Brittany Greiner was back in a Russian courtroom. How much is the Biden administration pushing for her release? A Marine who recently left a Russian prison says it needs to push harder.
The White House has the ability to get them out extremely fast, and they clearly have chosen not to do that.
Plus, an NBC News exclusive with Attorney General Merrick Garland. He says the Justice Department will not hesitate to prosecute anyone connected to January 6th, even inside the Trump White House.
Everyone, anyone who was criminally responsible for events surrounding January 6th accountable. That's what we do.
And criminal trials use all kinds of evidence, including rap lyrics. We'll show you how they play into an upcoming trial and hear an argument for leaving them out. The Gateway Arch, the Magic House, Soulard Farmers Market, the Anheuser-Busch Factory. Plenty to do in St. Louis, but not right now. It is drying out from floods that are historic and deadly.
The car made itself visible as the water receded, and we have pulled a civilian out of a vehicle that has passed. So we do have one fatality from this fast rising water.
Missouri Governor Mike Parson has declared a state of emergency. City and state officials have been working around the clock, and at times, it seemed like the flooding submerged entire neighborhoods. Highways and other major roads have been closed. The National Weather Service says St. Louis got more than 9 inches of rain in just a few hours, and that is the fastest rainfall in over a century. And it's easy to see just how dangerous things are tonight. Cars are getting stuck in parking lots. The transit line Metrolink is severely disrupted, with some stations ending up underwater. And residents are bailing water out of their homes as fast as they can. Today, the St. Louis fire chief said crews have rescued more than 70 people so far. Despite the city's warnings, some residents refuse to leave their homes. In a moment, we'll look at the national forecast, but let's begin in Hazelwood. That's a suburb of St. Louis along tonight.
Hey, Joshua. Yeah, we've been talking to so many people here in and around the St. Louis area, and obviously their stories are striking. They're really rattled by this. A lot of them telling us that they got those warnings from local news stations and from officials, basically saying that they had to be aware that flooding could happen. But a lot of them had no idea, and a lot of the forecasters had no idea about how extreme this could possibly be. One of the apartment complexes that we came to had more than 100 people trapped for hours before first responders were ready to get to them. The stories have just been pouring out all day. Here's one that we heard earlier.
I did not expect to get a call from my son at 3 a.m. expecting to see all of this water. I know it rains and it might flood a little bit, but this, I never in a million years thought this was going to happen when I came up here. I didn't expect this at all. You know, and I was totally shocked. I was totally shocked. Because I seen people coming up, water up to their shoulders, carrying babies. Yeah, I was totally shocked. And at that time, it wasn't no boats, no fire department was here. It was just 3 police officers and people just trying to help.
Maggie, I know we're having some trouble with your picture, but I hear what that woman in that clip is saying, and also what you mentioned from city officials, that they say that they had no idea that it was going to rain this much this fast. How are they assessing their preparedness for these storms, particularly with the possibility that more storms may be coming?
Sure. I mean, that's kind of assessing the preparedness for something that they, just like forecasters and just like people across the country, haven't encountered, as you said, in more than a century. So right now, I think it's safe to say, based on what we're hearing from officials and what we're hearing from first responders, they're not looking ahead to assessing their preparedness for the next one just yet. They're still stunned by this one because, again, forecasters and you know, meteorology is obviously an imperfect science. They had said that flooding was likely, but flooding to this magnitude had not been seen in, again, more than a century. So at this point, they're looking at what they did, which was, again, staffing up their first responder agencies, sheriff's departments, fire departments, EMTs, police, letting people know to stay off the roads if they can, if they didn't have to go to work or that kind of thing in the morning. But at this point, they're also bringing in that state of emergency declared by the lieutenant governor to free up federal and state agencies just to first start helping people clean up. And then they've said that they'll look at how they can better prepare for the next storm, Joshua. But again, this is new territory for everybody.
Yeah, and I can only imagine, you know, I grew up in South Florida, so I'm used to seeing this kind of flooding quite a bit. And summertime, when people would be out and about, visiting, going to Busch Stadium to watch the Cardinals play, or going to the Magic House, or going up to the Gateway Arch, like, this has got to be the worst possible time for this to happen. Are people expecting more storms like this in the future? You know, climate change is changing a little bit of everything, and I'm sure that between the climate damage, the economic impacts, folks have to be thinking about what the future is going to look like.
Definitely. I think it's safe to say scientists are expecting more storms like this, because we've been hearing from scientists today, especially that as our planet warms and our temperatures in general get warmer, that makes it so that the atmosphere can hold that much more moisture. So storms, they say, that are of this magnitude and this severe will become more common and will become more likely. But for a lot of people, you know, if we're talking about people here, they were just going about their daily lives. Like, they maybe perhaps know or have opinions on our climate crisis and climate change as a whole. But this, it's safe to say, is a wake-up call for the St. Louis area. And again, a lot of people kind of coming online and learning about what scientists are saying, that this is the climate crisis here, and this is one impact of it that we're going to see more often. Joshua.
Yeah, it's a good city. Spent a lot of time in St. Louis. It's real sad to see it flooded like that. But thank you, Maggie.
Yeah.
That's NBC's Maggie Vespa starting us off tonight from Hazelwood, Missouri. Well, floods are just one kind of extreme weather that the U.S. is dealing with. More than 30 million Americans are under heat warnings, mainly in the center of the country and in the Pacific Northwest. Much of Washington state is expecting a dangerous heat wave. Last year, Oregon, Washington, and British Columbia in Canada dealt with a massive heat dome. That's when high pressure traps hot air in place. The heat dome was responsible for hundreds of deaths. Let's continue now with NBC meteorologist Michelle Grossman, who is standing by with more on the Pacific Northwest and our national outlook. Hey, Michelle.
Hey there, Joshua. And yeah, we're going to see more extremes as we go throughout the next couple of days. We have an area of high pressure that's anchored in place. That's the climate connection. Our patterns sort of get stuck. It's like a traffic jam in the atmosphere, and our patterns aren't moving. And that's why we're seeing these extremes. Bone dry, hot, sunny in the Pacific Northwest, the South. And then we have 8 to 14 inches of rain falling in a very short amount of time in some spots. So let's start with the heat, and then we're going to talk about what we can expect in terms of rainfall tomorrow. So we're looking at heat alerts stretching from the Pacific Northwest into the South Central states. 32 million people impacted, whether it's a heat advisory, that's in your orange, a heat watch in that dark pink, and a heat warning, that's in your hot pink. So we're looking at a northwest sizzle continuing. It was hot yesterday. We had record-breaking temperatures again today. We're going to see more records broken tomorrow. Look at these temperatures in the Pacific Northwest. Keep in mind, a lot of people do not have air conditioning here, so it makes it that much worse. Medford tomorrow, 108 degrees, 102 in Bend, 108 in Monument, 101 in Burns. You get the idea. It is sizzling there. It's going to continue to be very, very toasty as we go throughout the rest of the week into the weekend. We're looking at temperatures not budging out of the triple digits in Kennewick, in Monument, in Bend, in Burns. Seattle, so hot too, with temperatures in the 90s. By Friday, 90 degrees. Spokane, we're looking at temperatures by Friday, 102, Saturday, 100. And then we're still sweltering in the South. We have been talking about this for a month straight, a month, 2 weeks, and that's part of the problem too. So that's that traffic jam where we're not getting the relief at night. We're not getting the relief at all. So that's where it's really stressful in your body, where it's just day after day, week after week. So we're looking at temperatures climbing into the triple digits once again. You factor in the humidity here, and we're looking at heat indices into the triple digits, feeling like 111 in Tulsa tomorrow. It's going to feel like 101 in Baton Rouge and feeling like 103 in Montgomery. Even as far north as Charlotte, we're going to be feeling like 101. Here's the relief in the Northeast. It felt so good today. The windows were open. We're going to have another refreshing day in the upper Midwest, the Great Lakes tomorrow. Minneapolis just 77, 82 in Chicago, 82 in Buffalo. The reason for this is we had a cold front that came through. That brought the relief. This is the same front that sort of parked over St. Louis today that brought rounds of rain. And we're going to see that as we go throughout the next couple of days. Take a look at radar right now because we are lit up in the southwest, the Four Corners. We are looking at monsoon moisture. We're going to watch this as we go throughout the next several days. You can see the shading in green. That is a flood watch. And then as we look towards the mid-Atlantic, also parts of the Ohio Valley, we also have another flood watch. We're going to see flash flood warnings tomorrow. We're going to see the risk for flash flooding. And that's something we're going to be watching very, very closely. So here's the setup. You see that stationary front. That's that line there with two different colors. It's that front that came through, brought the relief to the Northeast, and then sort of parked itself as it does with this climate connection. So a very slow-moving front producing rounds of heavy rain. As Maggie mentioned, we're just pulling water off the Gulf, and we're seeing these downpours. We've all seen those summer-like downpours. Well, they're unleashing even up to 14 inches of rain. We saw a radar report this morning of 14 inches of rain. That's a lot of rain in a very short amount of time. It's fast, it's furious, and it's potentially deadly. So as we go throughout tomorrow, these fronts are going to work in tandem. So we're going to see more rounds of rain soaking the Ohio Valley, also the Northeast, also the Southeast. The Southeast has seen so much rain this summer so far, and we're already just halfway through it. So your rainfall forecast, we are expecting a lot. Now we're seeing areas of 4 to 6 inches, but within these storms, we're seeing embedded thunderstorms, expecting embedded thunderstorms. We could see those heavy downpours, and we are worried, Joshua, for the risk of flash flooding as we go throughout the weekend as well.
Yeah, I see that area with a high rainfall forecast for Charleston, West Virginia, and a few other areas in the Mid-Atlantic. Yeah. Thank you, Michelle. With the outlook for the week's forecast. Meanwhile, California is fighting its largest wildfire this year. The Oak Fire is burning well east of San Jose near Yosemite National Park. It's burned at least 18,000 acres so far. At last check, fire crews had it about 1/4 contained. The fire has not grown significantly this week. Still, it's threatening towns near Yosemite. Thousands of Californians have evacuated their homes, and it's easy to see why, hoping they'll still be there once the fire is under control. But there's another reason the Oak Fire has slowed down. It's because of another fire. The flames have reached an area that was hit by the Ferguson fire back in 2018. NBC's George Solis has more from Mariposa County, California.
Yeah, and Joshua, the fire still rages, but some good news on the containment front. Fire officials say about 26% contained. Still, more than 18,000 acres have burned. That number, unfortunately, expected to go up. But the good news is this fire seems to be moving away from the homes and towards areas that have already been burned, therefore reducing the amount of potential for reignition here. Still, there is a lot of dry brush out here, so it's not surprising that some areas are still experiencing hot spots. And right now, firefighters are out there on the front line with strike teams improving those containment lines, making sure this fire does not continue to spread. Another thing that is helping right now, there is a little bit more humidity in the atmosphere, and that helps so that fire doesn't spread. And earlier, we felt what could have been a few more drops of rain certainly would have helped in this case. But the overall outlook is that some containment of this fire, at least the majority of it, could be by this weekend. Still, firefighters continue that aggressive attack. More than 300,000 gallons have been doused onto this fire. Smoke continues to be a big concern as well, especially with Yosemite being so close. The park's still open, but officials are worried that smoke could be a health hazard. Earlier, some Cal Fire officials spoke about the proximity of the fire to the park. Take a listen.
At this point, the fire does not appear to be an imminent threat to Yosemite. Sure, it's in the area, and sure, you know, at least one of the main roads into Yosemite is closed and inaccessible right now. But we don't believe that the fire is going to get into Yosemite. We believe we're going to be able to keep it out of there.
And again, it seems that the fire will be potentially contained by the weekend, but that does not mean that officials are letting down their guard. As for the homeowners, many of them are at the Red Cross shelter at the elementary school. Unfortunately, some properties have been lost in this fire, many still unable to return. More good news on that front, though. The evacuation orders that were in place, well, they're starting to get reduced to advisories. So that area continues to shrink, which is obviously a very good sign. But of course, conditions could change, and that's something that fire officials are very well aware of. And at this point, the cause of the Oak Fire is still under investigation. Joshua?
Thank you, George. That was NBC's George Solis reporting from Northern California. Still to come, WNBA star Brittany Greiner was back in a Russian courtroom today. We'll tell you the argument her defense team is making. We're glad you're with us for Now Tonight from NBC News. Brittany Greiner was back in a Moscow court today, arguing for leniency on drug charges there. Her defense team argued that she never meant to bring cannabis into Russia. Her lawyers say she did so involuntarily and in a rush. They pointed out that many athletes use cannabis to ease pain from injuries. Her team even brought in an expert in drug dependency called a narcologist. Russian officials detained Mrs. Greiner at a Moscow airport on February 17th. She had vape cartridges with hash oil in her luggage. She pled guilty, and some legal experts say that's her best bet for a prisoner swap. The idea is to trade her for a Russian in U.S. custody. Brittany Greiner has appealed directly to President Biden for help. It's just one more point of tension between Russia and the U.S., and she is hardly the first American that Russia has imprisoned. Trevor Reed, a Marine Corps veteran, was detained for 3 years. Russia released him back in April. He told NBC's Hallie Jackson that the Biden administration could be doing more in this case.
I can't say 100% what the White House is or is not doing. That's obviously not public information, but in my opinion, the White House has the ability to get them out extremely fast, and they clearly have chosen not to do that. So no, in my opinion, they're not doing enough.
So what happens now for Brittany Greiner? Let's get into that with Kimberly St. Julien Varnon, a PhD candidate at the University of Pennsylvania. Her research focuses on race and blackness in the Soviet Union, Russia, and Ukraine. Ms. Varnon, welcome. Good to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
So what do you make of Trevor Reed's comments there?
I think Trevor is responding to his own situation, his lived experience in Russia. Every day that he was in prison seemed like a lifetime. So I think putting that into perspective, it does seem like it's taken the Biden administration a long time to deal with Brittany's case. But on the flip side, we do have to recognize that the power that the United States has at this point to get Brittany and Paul Whelan out is relatively limited. Russia still has the cards, and Russia still has the upper hand here because they have 2 Americans held in detainment, one in a maximum security prison near the middle of Siberia, and Brittany right now, who's in a prison outside of Moscow. So I think we have to keep that in perspective when thinking about the timing and the length of time Biden and the Biden administration has had to deal with this case.
Hallie also asked Trevor Reed about the possibility of a prisoner exchange for them to get a Russian accused criminal who's being held in American custody and basically handing him over in exchange for Brittany Greiner. This is what Trevor Reed said about the possibility of that. Watch.
2 Americans who are sitting in there for nothing. And, you know, if it takes letting go of an actual criminal who has already sat in American prison for, I think, almost 20 years, you know, that seems like it's worth it to me.
What do you make of that? I was always told that an even swap is no swindle. Is that an even swap?
I think in the perspective of 2 innocent Americans who've been detained, it is an even swap. And so thinking about that, but also we aren't quite sure what specifically or whom Russia has asked for if there is a deal on the table. So we also have to keep that in mind. But I think that the perspective of trading 2 Americans for a Russian who has already served a considerable amount of prison time in America would be a beneficial swap, I think, to a lot of people.
That almost sounds like handing over a criminal for holding Brittany Greiner hostage in a way. I mean, she hasn't been adjudicated guilty, but maybe from a diplomatic perspective, it's a different sort of situation than just matching crimes for crimes. Is that the way to look at it?
I think it is. I mean, we are still going through her trial. Brittany's going to be testifying on her own behalf tomorrow. And this is why, when, as you mentioned at the top of the show about her pleading guilty or acknowledging her guilt, is key to kind of trying to speed up this process and get a conviction so you can start having these negotiations about a prisoner swap. But when we think about what it means if we do release a Russian prisoner in exchange for 2 Americans, Brittany Greiner, Paul Whelan, thinking about it toe for toe or crime for crime may not be as beneficial because Brittany is such a high-profile person. But also on the flip side, you have the problem of, will we be seen as rewarding Russia for constantly engaging in hostage diplomacy? So it's a very fine line that the Biden administration has to walk in these 2 cases.
We mentioned that your PhD research involves race and blackness in Russia, among other things. How do you see Brittany Greiner's race factoring into all of this?
So I've been following Brittany's case since the news broke about her imprisonment in Russia, and it's really interesting, and it's sad that my work has become important because of her case. But what I've found is her race is not necessarily a huge problem or very much talked about in Russia and in Russian discourse about her case. They're putting a lot of primacy in the state media about her Americanness. But where her race does come into play is how the American public and the discourse in America and how we're thinking about and talking about her case. And so you have people who are, really emphasizing just the really negative stereotypes of African Americans and African American women in particular in dealing with drugs. Even though she had a vape pen, she's alleged to have a vape pen with CBD oil that had a prescription from a doctor. On the flip side, you also have her supporters who are representatives of the Black community and the LGBTQ community who are saying that her case hasn't gotten enough attention because she is a Black and gay woman. So you have 2 kind of competing narratives inside the United States. But if you think about where she is in Russia, these 2 narratives aren't necessarily, being talked about as much, more that she is an American who's broken Russian law.
Are there Black communities or communities of African descent in Russia that are talking about this case? I mean, what is the presence of Blackness in Russia like these days?
So we don't know how many Africans or Afro-Russians there are in Russia because Russia doesn't legally see race. So you don't have a census where you can check a race box. But there are probably thousands of Afro-Russians, so people of African descent who are also Russian, but also there are thousands of African migrants and students who live in Russia. On the other hand, the problem is it's really hard to get a beat on Russian public opinion because Russia has closed itself off after its attack on Ukraine and the continued war in Ukraine. But also, the issues with racism in Russia mean that a lot of Africans and Afro-Russians are, remain silent when they are dealing with issues of race and probably aren't going to be talking about her cases publicly because it can make them a target of arrest and of, being fired and various things like that because you do not have freedom of speech anymore in Russia. So it's really hard to kind of get an idea of if they're talking about it or if they're getting information about the case.
PhD candidate Kimberly St. Julian Varnon of the University of Pennsylvania, we appreciate you putting this in some perspective for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We will get to some of today's other top stories in a moment, including Lester Holt's exclusive interview with Attorney General Merrick Garland about the January 6th investigation, an update from Kyiv on the war in Ukraine, and how that war might shake things up at the International Space Station. Will the Justice Department charge anyone for the January 6th attack? Some lawmakers and former prosecutors are pushing it to do just that. Among them, Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger of Illinois. This morning, he said the DOJ needs to follow the facts wherever they lead.
What have they been doing for the last year and a half? That said, if they are moving forward on looking at this stuff, I think that's very positive for the country.
The Washington Post reports he might be getting his way. According to 4 people familiar with the matter, they told the Post that the Justice Department is investigating Donald Trump's actions in its criminal probe related to January 6th. Again, this is the Post's reporting NBC News has not independently verified it as yet. But this report broke soon after Attorney General Merrick Garland gave an exclusive interview to NBC Nightly News anchor Lester Holt. That interview painted a clearer picture of the department's plans. NBC senior national political reporter Sahil Kapoor has more on that. Hey, Sahil.
Good evening, Joshua. It's been 5 days since the last January 6th hearing of the first tranche, and a question on the minds of many Americans, as well as some members of the committee, is will the Justice Department watch their investigation, collect facts of their own, and launch criminal charges against former President Trump? Remember, the committee painted a vivid picture of a president at the time watching that insurrection on this Capitol unfold and not doing anything to stop it for hours and hours. Now, one thing Attorney General Merrick Garland has been emphatic about is that no political considerations whatsoever will go into a decision to charge or not to charge the former president. Let's have a listen to what Attorney General Garland told our colleague Lester Holt.
You said in no uncertain terms the other day that no one is above the law. Yeah. That said, the indictment of a former president, of perhaps candidate for president, would arguably tear the country apart. Is that your concern as you make your decision down the road here? Do you have to think about things like that?
Look, we pursue justice without fear or favor. We intend to hold everyone, anyone who was criminally responsible for the events surrounding January 6th, for any attempt to interfere with the lawful transfer of power from one administration to another, accountable. That's what we do. We don't pay any attention to other issues with respect to that.
So if Donald Trump were to become a candidate for president again, that would not change your schedule or how you move forward or don't move forward?
I'll say again that we will hold accountable anyone who is criminally responsible for attempting to interfere with the legitimate, lawful transfer of power from one administration to the next.
And as you can hear there, Garland making clear that Trump's status as a former president or a potential future candidate in the 2024 election will have no bearing on whether the Justice Department will or won't charge him. They say, he says, accountability will be served to everyone involved, no matter what their level is. Now, there are members of this committee, including Republicans on the committee, who say the Justice Department must give this a very serious look. Adam Kinzinger of Illinois, one of them, saying it would send a bad message about the long-term viability of the Republic if a president or anyone can attempt a coup on the U.S. government and not get charged for it should there be sufficient evidence to do that. And Liz Cheney, the other Republican on the panel, has not ruled out the possibility of issuing criminal referrals from the House of Representatives to the Justice Department for a charge. Now remember, that would not force the Justice Department to actually do anything. That would simply be a suggestion, a formal suggestion, but still a suggestion. All of this, one of the biggest questions in the hands of the Justice Department for quite some time, rests with Merrick Garland. And as you can see, he didn't give many hints as to whether he will or won't issue charges against former President Trump. Joshua?
Thank you, Sahil. That's NBC senior national political reporter Sahil Kapoor on Capitol Hill. In Ukraine, millions of tons of grain are ready to leave the country's ports via the Black Sea. But will they make it out? It's all part of the UN-backed deal to resume food exports from Ukraine. Despite this deal, Russia has kept attacking near the port city of Odessa. Russian forces hit Odessa directly over the weekend. On top of affecting global food exports, Russia is also cutting its gas supplies to Europe. The continent relies significantly on Russian energy. Officials call the cutbacks serious. NBC's Josh Lederman has more from Kyiv. Hey, Josh.
Ever since the Russian military hit the Odessa port with 2 missiles a few days ago, the big question has been whether that would be a one-off or whether Russia would continue to target Odessa and possibly make it impossible for Ukraine to go ahead with exporting grain once again under a new UN-backed deal in which Russia and Ukraine are both supposed to take steps to make that possible. Today, the Russians did not hit the port of Odessa, but they did hit 2 areas not so far away, including the beachside town of Zatoka, southwest of Odessa, as well as farther north in the Mykolaiv region, where there were also strikes reported today. They didn't necessarily hit the ports, but they did add fresh uncertainty to this grain deal in which ships are supposed to start leaving Ukraine within the coming days, sailing through the Black Sea, avoiding mines that have been left in that sea, and Russia agreeing not to target those ships. And as that uncertainty over that deal continues, today, fresh concerns for Europe about their energy supplies, as Russia's state-owned Gazprom energy company cut the supplies of gas through a key pipeline into Europe down to 20% of capacity. And that is raising some real concerns as we approach the winter about whether Europe is going to be able to stockpile the energy supplies ahead of time that they're going to need to get them through the winter, particularly as Russia is, according to European Union officials, weaponizing energy and threatening to cut off Europe's supplies as they seek leverage in their conflict with Ukraine. And as the Europeans are trying to prepare for that possibility, today the EU agreeing to ration gas supplies. They are going to cut their use of gas by 15% in order to try to better prepare themselves to be able to withstand any attempts by Russia to cut off their supplies of energy. But some officials, including Ireland's transport minister, saying it may not be enough, that even farther, more drastic cuts may be needed so that Europe can spare itself a true energy crisis come the winter.
Thank you, Josh. That was NBC's Josh Letterman reporting from Kyiv. So, Russia is shaking things up in the waters off Ukraine, in the gas pipelines over Europe, and today, even in space. This morning, it announced plans to pull out of the International Space Station in 2024. According to Russian media, the country's new space chief told President Vladimir Putin that his agency would build its own space station. A week and a half ago, Russia signed a deal with the U.S. to keep sharing flights to and from the station. The first flight under that agreement is still set to launch in September. Coming up, are we in a recession? We can't say, but we know who can. It's not official until one group in particular says so. We'll tell you who and how that works just ahead. Stay close.
The totality of the economic data is consistent with that type of transition and is not consistent with a recession.
When it comes to the economy, the White House is taking a kind of glass half full approach. But what about a recession? President Biden is being optimistic, but still cautious. He's been trying not to scare the economy into a recession while focusing on the strongest numbers.
We're not going to be in a recession, in my view. The employment rate is still one of the lowest we've had in history. It's in the 3.6 area. We still find ourselves with people investing. My hope is we go from this rapid growth to steady growth. And so we'll see some coming down. But I don't think we're going to, God willing, I don't think we're going to see a recession.
Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen says she sees a slowdown in economic growth, but she still sounded optimistic on Meet the Press.
I mean, if the technical definition is 2 quarters of contraction, you're saying that's not a recession?
That's not the
No?
That's not the technical definition. There's an organization called the National Bureau of Economic Research that looks at a broad range of data in deciding whether or not there is a recession. And most of the data that they look at right now continues to be strong. I would be amazed if the NBER would declare this period to be a recession, even if it happens to have 2 quarters of negative growth.
But if the common definition of a recession does not fit this moment, as Secretary Yellen said, then how do we know if we're in one? Well, the answer lies with that group that she mentioned, the National Bureau of Economic Research. If anyone can declare a recession, they can. In fact, they're the only ones who can. Joining us now to explain is Larry Edelman, a financial columnist and associate editor at the Boston Globe. Mr. Edelman, welcome. Good to have you with us.
Good evening. Thanks.
So tell us about this group. What is the National Bureau of Economic Research?
The National Bureau of Economic Research, Joshua, was set up in 1920 to do just that, economic research. There was a dearth of data on the economy, and a couple of guys got together and decided they wanted to change that. And they formed this group. And they made an informal one that they wouldn't be political, that they were going to purely, they wouldn't make policy recommendations. They would instead, just look at the data and publish what they found. In 1978, they formed a committee called the Business Cycle Dating Committee. It's got 8 members, and these are the people who get together, look at all the data as Secretary Yellen said, and then come up with whether they feel we're in a recession.
She said that there were more data to look at than just 2 quarters of economic decline that factor into the definition of a recession. What are some of those other data? Without getting too deep into the weeds, can you explain some of the other things that they would consider?
There's things like personal income. There's the number of jobs being created each month, the unemployment rate, how much people are spending, consumer spending, wholesale and retail sales, and industrial production. Those are some of the major ones that the committee says it looks at to determine whether we're in a recession or not.
So suppose this group, the NBER, the National Bureau of Economic Research, gets together and says, you know what? We're in a capital R recession. This is real. Write the report, send it to Washington. It's a real thing. What happens next?
Well, then you've got it for the record. This is really something for the history books. As you mentioned, there's no single definition of a recession. And, on Wall Street, they typically say back-to-back quarters of negative economic growth, a decline in GDP. Now, we know that the first quarter GDP fell 1.6%, but there was, kind of a statistical quirk with that, in that the decline reflected a really big increase in imports, and imports tend to, show that people are buying. So it was kind of a disconnect that quarter. Now, there are estimates now that in the second quarter, GDP also contracted, but even then, it wouldn't necessarily be a recession. The big difference is employment. It's very hard to have a recession when you've got near record low unemployment and the economy is creating several 100,000 jobs a month. That doesn't square with a widespread decline in economic activity.
I wonder what your sense is of the impact of having this bureau declare a recession when you've got all kinds of Wall Street analysts and CEOs prognosticating about recessions now and, going on CNBC and talking about when they think it's going to be and what the impact is going to be and so on. I mean, part of the economy is just how we feel about the economy. What's the impact of this official organization saying capital R recession compared to what we're hearing on CNBC?
Well, I think that the big issue is political. Once the Bureau has declared a recession, then whoever's in power is under the gun. You caused a recession under your watch. We fell into a recession, and the opponents, so the Republicans would go after Biden big time on that. Would just give another piece of ammunition to attack for the midterms and for the 2024 presidential election. So I think the biggest impact really is going to be political. I mean, once we've got 2 quarters of negative growth, some people are going to be calling it a recession anyway. But as long as there's that ambiguity, as long as neighbor hasn't come out and said officially there's a recession, the administration will have some defense. Especially in the job numbers. I mean, it's really hard to argue that.
Larry Edelman of the Boston Globe, I appreciate you helping explain this to us. This can get very, very complicated, but thank you for breaking it down and keeping it simple. We appreciate it. Thanks.
Sure thing, sure.
Hey, before we move on, I need to correct something that we had in the show a little earlier. We mentioned St. Louis and the St. Louis area where there had been a state of emergency declared. We said that the governor, Mike Parson, had signed that state of emergency. It was actually the lieutenant governor, Mike Kehoe. He signed the executive order. Governor Parsons is out of the country right now on an international trade mission. Also worth noting, another governor has signed a state of emergency. Governor Kate Brown of Oregon declared a state of emergency due to the forecast heat that's coming in 25 Oregon counties, and that state of emergency runs through the end of this month. But again, it was Missouri's lieutenant governor, not the governor. Sorry about that. Rap music is a form of artistic expression, and sometimes it factors into criminal cases. But should it? We'll take a closer look at a case in Georgia and see how art can become evidence before we go. Prosecutors in Georgia will use art as criminal evidence in an upcoming trial. The defendants are two popular artists from the music label YSL. Jeffrey Williams and Sergio Kitchens have been in custody since May. Kitchens raps under the name Gunna. He's got 2 #1 albums. Williams is known as Young Thug. Both men have been held without bond. They are charged as part of an 88-page indictment of 28 people in Atlanta for gang-related drug, weapon, and violent offenses. Their lyrics were quoted 11 times as, quote, overt acts, connecting them to crimes. Now, lyrics will not be the only evidence used in court. The indictment also cites bandanas and gang signs from social media marketing and music videos. One prosecutor referred to Mr. Williams' slang name, King Slime, to argue that he is the gang leader.
That you see the shadow in the back of the room. He's the one directing traffic. He is the one they're all afraid of. He's the one that's King Slime. He's pulling the shots. He is the most dangerous of the 28, Judge.
Let's discuss the case with Chris Timmons, a trial attorney and former prosecutor. He's litigated similar cases in Georgia. And Jennifer Justice, the CEO and founder of the consulting firm, The Justice Department. She's also a former entertainment attorney. Welcome to you both. And Mr. Timmons, I wonder if I could start with you and an explanation of one of the laws that's going to be key in this case, the RICO Act. I think some of us who watch way too many gangster movies are familiar with what the RICO Act is. But for everybody else, tell us what the act is and how it factors in here.
Sure. So the RICO Act was originally created to combat organized crime. It's a way of linking up seemingly unrelated crimes together under one conspiracy. So, for example, if you've got an organized crime ring that over on one side you've got Jimmy the Fish running gambling, you've got, Polly Walnuts over here running prostitution, and then it all leads up to the same gang leader. The folks running gambling, the folks running prostitution may not even know each other, but the RICO Act allows you to bring them all inside the umbrella. You're prosecuting the conspiracy, you're prosecuting the organization.
Jennifer, Justice, authorities say that the gang at the center of this is Young Slime Life. That's the YSL. YSL says that it's a record label. What do we know about the group's background, the group's history, that might help us suss out who's right?
Well, I don't know if knowing anything about the history other than the fact that they are all rappers from a similar area and the same kind of music is really, in a cultural background, is really what brings them together, which is very typical of music labels in general. It is, I worked with Rockefeller Records and Rock Nation. They all were hip hop artists for the most part, and all from a certain kind of culture and spoke to a certain kind of, fan base. Same with country music or Latin music. So I don't know that that is anything in particular that would bring it together to say that they are all some part of a big RICO or organized crime, situation.
Chris Timmons, let me ask you in terms of the use of the lyrics. One of the lyrics that was cited in the indictment from Jeffrey Williams, a.k.a. Young Thug, from a video posted on social media said, "I never killed anybody, but got something to do with that body." What's your sense of how lyrics like these stand up in court?
Well, there are a few different rules of evidence that are in play. One is Rule 403, which has to do with whether evidence is so highly prejudicial that it would be unfair to bring it in against in a criminal trial. The other one is the character evidence rule that says that you can't bring in unrelated bad acts unless they prove somehow that the existing crime happened. And so with regard to the lyrics, I mean, it's going to be a test that the judge is going to have to run to look at how close these lyrics are to the actual crimes that they're charged with. Do they match up with the crimes? Are they evidence of that particular crime? And so the rules of evidence in the state of Georgia, and as they are across the entire United States, are fairly permissive. You want evidence to get to the jury. And keep in mind the jury's the gatekeeper. Just because it comes in doesn't mean that they have to make the conclusion that that evidence necessarily proves something or not. I mean, these are 12 citizens. It's the biggest gatekeeping part of our criminal justice system. So, I mean, the judge is there to make a determination on whether the lyrics are going to come in as evidence or not. The jury is ultimately the one that's going to make the decision on how probative those lyrics are.
Yeah, Ms. Justice, in terms of how probative they are, I wonder, as an entertainment attorney, someone with experience kind of in this general area, how you view the interpretation of rap lyrics as evidence of a crime. I mean, that's one of the longest running, issues in terms of rap music, which is street cred. We have come a very long way from the message with Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five to where people have been rapping about the thug life they actually lived. So how do you separate that? How do you parse that out? Especially since some rappers have foolishly tried to live that thug life to seem more authentic, but then ended up in trouble with the law.
Well, I think you said it very well. A lot of it is bravado and bragging and not necessarily true. And you definitely can't use lyrics as a sole source of evidence. In particular, the fact that they're being used only in rap music, right? We're not hearing about country music or, books or art. If that were the case, would Nabokov would he be arrested for rape of a young girl in Lolita? So I think it's a very dangerous, slippery slope, and it's being treated as if, these guys are like reading from their diary and this is what their life is. That's not true. It's not always true. It's not it shouldn't just be what people are hanging their hat on. This is a total form of artistic expression. They have a freedom of speech. And if they live that life every day, it would be exhausting, right? There's just no way.
Chris Timmons, there's a state lawmaker here in New York, Senator Brad Hoylman, who has introduced a bill that would limit the use of lyrics as evidence in criminal cases. Here's part of what he said about his bill. Watch.
No one ever thought that Johnny Cash was going to shoot a man in Reno just to watch him die, or Bob Marley shot a sheriff but spared a deputy. But that's exactly what prosecutors are trying to convince juries about across this country.
I think I understand what he's getting with, but at the same time, and I got to let you go in just a second, this almost feels like that O.J. Simpson book, If I Did It. Like, if you're dumb enough to write about a crime you just committed, don't you belong behind bars? Like, what idiot admits that on a record? Like, I'm just trying to understand where the First Amendment ends and where criminal justice begins. Before we go, how do you see it?
Sure. Well, I mean, the First Amendment would be whether they're being prosecuted directly for having those lyrics. So like under some sort of obscenity statute, that's really where the First Amendment begins and ends. When we're talking about evidence, you're absolutely right. I mean, if somebody writes a book that says, if I did it, and lays out in graphic detail exactly what they did, that's going to be great evidence. And so what you're looking at when you're talking about protecting speech is the use of the rap lyrics going to have some sort of chilling effect on whether people produce rap music? And it's sort of putting the cart before the horse. Nobody's going to stop writing rap music because they're concerned that they're going to get prosecuted later for a murder. And so I don't think that's the concern. I really think this is an overreach by the government. I think, everything's fine. I think the rules of evidence will take care of it.
Chris Timmons, trial attorney and former prosecutor Jennifer Justice, Jennifer Justice, CEO and founder of the Justice Department consulting firm. Good to have you both with us. Thank you both very much. And hey, thank you for making time for us. Before I let you go tonight, a quick programming note. This week, we're going to meet the director of the documentary series, The Captain. Maybe you've been watching it. It profiles New York Yankees Hall of Famer Derek Jeter. If you're watching the series, I'd love to know what you think of it so far and what questions you have. And perhaps you have thoughts about the use of rap lyrics in prosecutions. Love to know your thoughts on that as well. We're at NBC Now Tonight on social media. You can leave us a brief but brilliant voicemail, 888-575-2NBC, or email us nowtonight@nbcnews.com. Until we meet again, I'm Joshua Johnson. We'll see you tomorrow. Good night.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.